Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Kristian Roberts. I'm the Director of Education at the Dallas Opera. I'm here with my fabulous colleague and co-host,
Quo Johnson, Education and Company Culture Manager for the Dallas Opera.
and we are coming through yet again with another episode of Taking the Stage with Kristian
and Quo. One of the things we've started doing and one of the things we will continue to do is a land and people acknowledgement. We do this so that we can center accountability, so that we can center truth, so that we can center connection. And with this, I want to acknowledge that here in Dallas, we are on the land of the Caddo, of the Wichita, and of the Comanche sovereign nations. Nations that were forcefully removed from their homes, from their land, so that others can come in and settle the land. They faced genocide, they faced policy that allowed for the removal by any means necessary, and forced erasure or attempted erasure. I also want to take the time to acknowledge that here in Dallas, we are on stolen land that is built by stolen labor. People were stolen from their homes off the coast of Africa and brought here to Dallas and forced into labor. They were enslaved, but they continued to create stories just like our indigenous brothers and sisters. They continued to thrive. They continued to move forward so that we could all have the opportunity to connect with one another. So with this, I uplift the stories that we have. I uplift the opportunity to create more stories. And I uplift our honor, our responsibility, and the accountability necessary to create connections going forward. So thank you for joining me for this Land and People acknowledgement.
and thank you for joining us for today's show. So I also want to make sure that I thank our staff at the Dallas Opera, of course, for your support as always, to our leadership as well. And of course, as per usual, a shout out to our boy, David Lomeli.
Hey, David.
Because, TDO Network was his brainchild, is his brainchild. And so let's get into today's guest. I need y'all to understand something out there. This woman here kicked off a firestorm at a conference that we had in Dallas in 2017 when we hosted the Opera America conference here. And it was one of the days that I will never forget. She hosted a session with us, and it was so incredibly informative, so incredibly thought-provoking that it sort of set the tone for the rest of the conference. And so I will hand it over. Ma'am, will you please introduce yourself?
Thank you so much. I would be more than happy to. It's such a pleasure to be here with you both. My name is Michelle Ramos. I am Executive Director of Alternate Roots. My pronouns are she, her, hers. And I am calling in today from the land of Bulbancha, better known as New Orleans, Louisiana. And it is such a pleasure to be here with y'all.
We snap.
Yes, we snap. So I want to do everything, but I also know we have a certain amount of time. So let's just talk about yourself for a little bit, because you have a very interesting background for people who don't know. So let's do a little bit about your background. Let's talk about your background in the arts, dance, community work, all that whole thing. I know that's probably a path, but if you can give us a short version right now, I just sort of want people to get to know you a little bit.
Absolutely. I'll try to give you the most concise version that I can. Came to the arts through my love of dance. My mother, Magdalena Ramos, took me to see the Nutcracker when I was 5 years old, and I looked up on the stage and said, that's what I want to do with my life. I want to be a dancer. And so I got my calling early to do dance and never looked back. Through my early years and through teenage and my 20s, worked as a professional ballet dancer, dancing with Colorado Ballet, Dance Theater of Harlem, and just was blessed to have a really lovely and amazing career. I was an early mother at the age of 21 and gave birth to my daughter, Eleanor Scott, who is, interestingly enough, now a choreographer on Broadway. So she got the dancing gene. But through that time, I also, ballet was the first, I don't want to say the first, but definitely was one of the very earliest awarenesses that I had about racism and about how it shows up. I remember going to a ballet audition and them cutting every brown and black dancer in the room, and all of us sitting in the dressing room afterwards going, someone write, this isn't okay, right? And so I think because I chose a Eurocentric art form, as you know, with opera, it's I fell in love with the Eurocentric art form, but that art form does not love people who look like me, and especially back then in the dinosaur days. Being a Black dancer was not okay. I was always, you don't have the right body type, don't stay out of the sun, and you're doing Swan Lake and you need to look like the other white dancers, that was very, that was just accepted language and discussion points, and it always felt really horrible. And so I think very early on, I started fighting there, fighting for, I'm not going to do that, fighting for, that's not okay, and that sort of started my very young advocacy, around anti-racist, policies and things that I felt like should be the norm, but that they weren't. And with my family, I had an uncle who was incarcerated, who during my very early years won a landmark case in the state of Colorado that forever changed how prisoners were treated in the prison system. It's called Ramos v. Lamb. You can look it up on the ACLU website in Colorado to this day. And watching his brave advocacy from the inside of a cell, I think lit a fire under me about what was possible outside, right? Like, I'm like, if he could win this level of a case from inside of a cell, imagine, what I could do from out here. And I think that was sort of the flame that lit my desire to go to law school. And so, went to college and law school later in life after I had my professional dance career. By that time, my daughter was getting older and I was moving to different cities, New York, and then back to the California area. Spent time working for the ACLU and the Innocence Project. The law that I always was interested in doing was civil rights work, worked as a civil rights attorney. And then, became a little disheartened with the law, recognizing that it wasn't designed for people like us. I thought if I could be a part of the system, I could help make the changes. But as I started to become a part of the system, I started realizing, oh no, this system isn't designed for us. And I've got to figure out other ways that I can do what I need to do. And it's not going to be by being a lawyer. And so then I actually went to the other side and became like a trial consultant to try to help on that side of things. I'm like, the power isn't actually the attorney. The power is in the jury who's making the decision. So I went into that line of work for a while. Came back to doing policy work, lots of community activism and community organizing over the course of all those years. Ended up working at the Vera Institute of Justice when I relocated here to New Orleans for that reason, because it was at that point the largest incarcerator in the world, not in the country, in the world. So I couldn't think of a better place to come use my skill set and my talents, and was in that role for a while when the Alternate Roots job became available. And at that time I was missing my arts, my part of my art self, right? Like, I was so involved in the law and the policy and all the things, and I loved it, but there was this little inkling inside of me, like, what about with your love for the arts? Where is that manifesting? And I remember trying to bring the arts into Vera, like saying, well, why don't we have artists come in and do a sit-in luncheon with us to talk about how they use their artistry with social justice, and I kept trying to pull the art into my role. But so then when the Roots job opened up, it was like the culmination of all of my life's work, both in arts and in social justice and in the law, fit together into a perfect role. And so I think I found my home. Yeah. Sorry, that wasn't very short.
No, but it was so epic. There's so much.
Yeah, it was epic. It was brilliant. Completely okay. Absolutely okay.
No, I think that's one of the things we like to highlight on here is the differing paths, that people take, and how they got to where they are. And I think the thing that stuck out to me the most was what you said. Here I am now is a culmination of everything I did up to this point, and it's so huge, and the things that it took to get there. And so it kind of threw me for my next question, because I was going to ask, how do you combine, law into your practice? But you kind of already explained it a little bit. But I think I want to talk a little bit about, let's talk about alternate roots. Let's talk about roots. Let's talk about roots in the organization itself, because I want people to understand what you all do.
Absolutely. So Alternate Roots has been around for 44. In 2021, it'll be our 45th year. And it was birthed at the Highlander Center in Newmarket, Tennessee, the home where Martin Luther King and Rosa Parks were trained in their civil justice work. And that is where our organization was birthed. And it, in the very beginning, the reason it was called Alternate Roots, which is spelled ROOTS, it actually stood for Regional Organizations of Theaters in the South. And it was a group of theater artists who came together that said, hey, we are doing all this work that is grounded in social justice, and there's no service organization, there's nobody out there that's really holding artists who are doing this kind of work at that time. So we need to just make our own organization. And so they did. John O'Neill in the early days, and several of our founders and elders, many of whom are still around to this day, came together and said, we need to be a voice in the fight, right? Like we can use our artistry to enhance all of the work and the fighting that is going on around civil rights, civil and social justice. And so the organization then moved to Atlanta, Georgia, where it is based now, although I will say we are in a 100% remote office. Mm. And I think over that time, it morphed into an organization that represents all artists in all disciplines, because they quickly realized that a lot of artists are doing this work, and a lot of artists want to lend their artistry to work for good and work for the community. And it also was a home for a lot of social justice advocates and for community organizers who self-define as artists, right? But by a traditional professional arts, framework, don't really fit in. And so for them, it was like a home where they could really find other like-minded folks who were doing this work and using their artistry for the betterment of the good, the community, and for the cause.
So cool.
You're just like, snaps.
It's just so cool. Like, I have nothing else to say about that. It's just so cool that and it's interesting that you say that they didn't fit into what we would, an artist, and they were more activists, but they found a way to do both, and that you created a home in order for people to be able to do both, and that is something that's going on in the arts industry right now, and particularly in opera, is the question of, where do we sort of land and fall in between those two worlds? So it's interesting to hear you talk about that, and I hope our audience is listening.
Even in listening, because I'm gonna take it a little further. I hope that we're listening, because there's still a question of whether or not we should fall in between that. In some cases, there is a question of whether or not it's a responsibility of organizations, of opera organizations, of arts organizations, to have a voice in this conversation. And I cannot tell people what to do, of course. However, to have the time to question means that there's a lack of connection with the people we actually want to serve. And that's everybody, because everybody is being robbed by this system, even if those effects are delayed. Even if it comes later on in life, even if it comes, during a pandemic, when you realize that, oh, this stuff is real. And we have that month of guilt or whatever else it was, but then also the month, I call it Great Awakening.
The Great Awakening.
Or the awakening spurring something in us where, okay, I did not know before, I know now, and I want to do better. So we want to acknowledge that if we're still asking that question, so anyone who's still asking that question, no, yes, you have a responsibility, especially as a nonprofit organization. You have a responsibility. And then as an artist, you can do whatever you want with your art as an artist, but as an artist, it is also important that we're mindful of the roles that we play in our communities, the roles that we play in our nation, the roles that we play in our stories. And one of the things I love, Michelle, is that as you had your journey, and Kristian spoke about, even as you had your journey, it kind of became this culmination of you and your experiences and your stories. We're so big on narratives, especially in opera, because that's what we do. We're telling stories, it's storytelling. And how all of these experiences led to you standing on your own and representing something in a way that impacted so many other people. not so much directly, but indirectly as well, right? So your direct impact on us indirectly impacts others. The work that your uncle did, right? Your mother taking you to ballet. These things mean something, and they continue to mean something. They continue to be a part of who we are and what we carry with us as we engage with other people forever, right? And going forward. So as our opera leaders are listening, as our arts leaders are listening, as our art activists are listening, you have a responsibility. And it's okay, because you don't have to do it alone, as we always say, but move forward in that. Accept that and then move forward in it. So I appreciate that.
Absolutely. I think often, and I, earlier in my career when, I was like starting to engage with a lot of predominantly white institutions and doing this very basic foundational work, that was always one of the questions. It's like, should we be doing this? Or what is our role in this? What is our obligation? What is our, and my sort of common denominator would be like, are you representing artists? Are artists human beings?
Ooh.
Artists are humanity. So for you to say you don't think you have an obligation when you actually represent human beings, humanity, people who are day in and day out doing amazing things with their artistry, or maybe not so amazing things because they're single moms, or they're having a financial crisis, or because they're the most underpaid industry, in the country. Like, they're people. And I feel like there's sort of this, like, we represent artists, or even arts administrators for that matter, right? But at the end of the day, all those individuals are people. They're human beings. And so to say or ask the question, do I have a responsibility? Well, who are you holding? Who are you taking care of? They're human beings. Of course you have a responsibility. But I think that comes from the framework of the nonprofit, what I call the nonprofit industrial complex. A lot of us call it that. Being process focused and not people focused. If you are a people-centered organization, then that question doesn't get asked, because you know that you have that responsibility. But if you're a process and outcome centered organization, then those people lose their humanity, and they just become the tool with which you try to deliver your outcomes or your impact.
That's good. Because that's a word. And again, it is the absolute truth. So and it's showing now. It's showing now. It's why, we knew it was things were happening before the pandemic. We knew that some of these issues were around. And then when we were in this traditional pause that we're in, I keep calling it this traditional way of producing has been paused. A lot of things just bubbled up to the surface all at once. And this is definitely a time to look at it. So I appreciate you saying that, because I think a lot of people lose sight of that, or they're not even aware that that's what's happening, because it's been preached as sort of business practices. Good business practices, right.
Exactly.
People don't realize that they're causing more damage than good. So so let's just talk, because I want to talk more about the way your experiences have sort of intersected, because one of the things that we like to do is tie things together, particularly in opera. And in working in education, I always try to get students to relate opera to something in their life. If they've never been in opera before, I always say something like, well, what job or skill set do you think would not be needed in opera? And I haven't been stumped yet. Quo has not been stumped yet. So I like to sort of tie these things together. So can we talk about like some of your experiences throughout this work and the way you've seen arts and social justice and activism come together? Have there been any like particular projects where you saw them come together in the way that you essentially had been moving toward building, again, in your culmination of where you are right now? Have there been things that have stuck out of you along the way, experiences that have sort of been like, yeah, this is what it's about?
Yeah, I mean, I think that, you know, I'm very aware of the fact that the artists are, they are the creators of this work, right? Like Roots is the organization that supports and that funds the work, but we don't necessarily do any type of curation. We don't just, you know, we say, are you doing this work? Are you in our region? You know, how can we help you? Whether that's monetary or otherwise. So my reflections here are not necessarily something where we had a vision or of something we wanted to happen, but more of like, oh my gosh, this artist did this particular piece of work and it just blew me away. And, you know, so I talk about it all the time when people, because a lot of people have a hard time understanding sometimes that intersection. They're like, well, how do you do art and, you know, social justice stuff? I don't understand. Like, how does art intersect with prisons? How does art intersect with immigration? Like, we don't, it's a hard, it's conceptually hard for people to kind of understand that, which I get, because it feels to the average person probably like those are such disparate things. But I think until you give that example of, here's an example of how this was used. And so, one of my favorite examples that I like to offer, and of course I'm sitting here right now late in the day and I'm like, oh, I can't think of the artist's name. Hopefully I'll think of it as I'm giving the example. But we have an artist here in Louisiana, New Orleans, who her work is centered around prisons or this particular project she did, it was centered around prisons and more particularly solitary confinement and advocating for the harm that's caused, for the number of people that are in it, for the ridiculous reasons they get put in it, and for the psychological trauma that it creates, and then also the impact to the family members of someone who is in solitary confinement. And so the project is called Solitary Gardens. And what this artist did was she set up to be able to go in and have conversations with folks who were in solitary confinement, and just, you can imagine what that was, trying to coordinate to even do that. And then also had conversations with the family members. And then what the actual project was she like would find a space, and I believe she's done this in multiple cities, but she found a space and she created a literal like outline of what a solitary cell size-wise is on land, on a piece of land, and everything from like the toilet to the sink to the size of the bed, and then to the, you know, little strip that is the only free space that's in the cell. And then in conversations with the family and the incarcerated individuals, they would talk about their family history. They would talk about where they grew up and what memories and what cultural things were important to them about their family, and how that might take place in the way of plants or flowers. And so each solitary garden had plants or flowers or seeds or soil or something that was the story that was told or shared between the incarcerated person and their family. And then that garden was populated with those things. So the impact of that is, and I saw this firsthand, is you bring someone into that space, and maybe you have 5, maybe you have 8 of those laid out on land. And at first look, you're like, oh, beautiful gardens. Those are lovely. And they're all different, and they all have, you know, different qualities, different aspects to them. But then she asks you to step into the space. And you step into the space and you're like, oh yeah, this is, you know, lovely garden, whatever. But then it occurs to you, oh, this is the size of a space a person has to live in 24 hours, sometimes 23 hours a day for sometimes 20 years. And as people are standing in that space, they start to connect like, oh my God, like this is inhumane. This is barbaric. Like we actually do, like, you know, it occurs to people how ridiculous it is. And then they start to read the stories, right? So they're standing in this garden, this for all intents and purposes, the family garden of these individuals. And then they're told the story of the individual who was in that space, in that prison that's just a few miles away. And they get to hear like, oh yeah, this person, you know, was incarcerated because he and his wife were caught, stealing diapers for their family because he had just lost his job, but because it was his third time, getting arrested for something, he's in for 20 years. And because he stood up for himself and argued with the guard, he has now been in solitary confinement for the past 2 years. And this is the space he lives in. And this is what actually happened that made him be in this space. And I have seen that bring people to their knees. Mm-hmm. People who previously were like, oh, they deserve to be locked up, they're criminals, there's no use for people like that, they're a problem in the system, we should lock them away and throw the key away and da-da-da-da. And I have seen people like that have their minds changed by stepping into art or seeing art like that, because it tells the story and it tells it in a way that resonates. Because if you are somebody who thinks that, you probably have a family member that that you have a story about soil, planting, or gardening. I mean, at the top of our call today, we were talking about gardening, right? Yeah. Like that's a very common thing. So that is an example that I like to use of how, the artistry and the social justice can change minds. And if you can change minds, then you can change legislation, you can change laws, you can change how things are done. But and that's a long-standing practice of roots of story circles. John O'Neill and others created story circles, which are, in my opinion, some of the best ways to convene people together, because it requires you to listen.
Yes.
You tell your story, but it requires you to listen. And that's the missing piece oftentimes, is people aren't listening. It's usually a one-way conversation. Let me tell you what you need to know. Let me tell you what you should believe, versus let me tell you my experience of my life. You tell me yours, and let's listen to each other to see if we can find commonality and then grow into the advocacy. Yeah. And I'm dying right now because I can't think of that. I'm gonna have to look it up now because I feel horrible. I'm like,
no, it's okay.
That's okay, because I'm gonna check it out immediately after this, and then I'm gonna make sure we tag it in this episode. And that is so powerful in the simplicity of stepping into the space, but the power of sharing in an experience. Like, you have to experience it yourself sometimes, yes, but
absolutely.
Shows the importance of narrative, which we're always about. It shows the importance of sharing stories, of telling stories, of listening to stories, and being able to create space within self so that we can make sure we get to the point where the stories we tell resonate in different ways, on different layers, on different levels, and just doing that through art, right? So I extend that once again into our arts organizations. That is how powerful our what we do. That's how powerful it is. And then extending that into making sure that we partner with artists, with community-based artists, and that creativity, that very raw lived experience that goes into that type of storytelling, right? We're looking for stories. We want to tell more stories. We need to make sure we expand our circle, or expand our bubble, or expand our world of storytellers and artists, and what counts as being an artist. So that's powerful. That's
absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. That's why I always start with my childhood story of all the Black and brown dancers being cut in the room. If I'm in a room full of dancers, that resonates. I could say, oh, well, when I was a young girl, I was discriminated because I was a dancer of color. That means nothing. That you hear a story about an audition that someone went to that you did dozens and dozens of times when you were a young girl. Now, all of a sudden, there's a commonality and a relatability that they're like, oh, yeah, I went to a lot of auditions too when I was a kid, and I remember that happening. Or, yeah, now that you think about it, I don't remember seeing a lot of Black and brown dancers in the auditions I went to.
Yeah, no, and I found that to be one of the most powerful things in the story circles. Those are incredible, and that the connection of humanity that happens there through narrative it's such a huge thing. And we always talk about the connection and the emotion, and just seeing somebody as a fellow human being through storytelling. It is such an incredible tool. Just as you were talking, when you said that about, being cut because you saw the Black and brown dancers being cut, it immediately came to mind to the Peruvian singer Susana Baca. She talks about how she was a fabulous dancer as a kid, and she can remember that none of the darker skinned girls got chosen.
Mm-hmm.
And she remembers that, and now she's like this world famous singer and has a government role in Peru now, and is magnificent in every way. And it's just incredible that here in another country we're hearing that same story. So it's not unique to this country.
No, it's not. People think racism is an American problem. I'm like, no, it's a global problem. Let's be clear.
Some of y'all are just better at hiding
it.
But,
yeah.
Yeah. The people in the diaspora, we know.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So that story is incredible. And what is did you find the name of the artist?
The artist is Jackie Sumal.
Okay. So we want to make sure that we put that in.
I'll send you the link.
Thank you, Jackie.
Yeah.
Yes, because that is
amazing.
extremely powerful. I mean, it really is. So I guess in a time like this, and you are in leadership in a time that is tumultuous, where racial justice is on everybody's, well, most people's minds. It is very clear that civil unrest is very clear. It's hot politically right now. I mean, all of these things are going on, and then on top of all that, coronavirus, COVID-19 has essentially shut the doors of many arts organizations and all these things. And one of the things we like to get into here is sort of what kind of self-care tips do you have as somebody who is really essentially on the front lines of this work, and know not only just you don't just have the arts and the artist and that lofty thing, but you also know the real knit and the grit of what it takes to get these kinds of things done, and the law. Mm-hmm. So I know, having that knowledge and that particular skill set and all those things coming together, I know you have some things that we can talk about how we take care of ourselves in a time like this with this kind of work.
Absolutely. Well, I will say that, my attention to self-care during this time has just been honed in, because I could immediately feel at the onset of all of the pandemic back in March and everything, I could feel it in my body. I could feel the pressure, the tension, the urgency that I was holding and that others were holding around me. And so, and it's so easy to get caught up, right? In that, like we talked about, like people-centered versus procedural. I mean, Roots like prides itself on being a people-centered organization. But when the pandemic hit and it was immediately clear, like, we need to get money in our people's hands. We need, our folks are the most impacted.
Mm-hmm.
You're watching on the news, like, it's all the Black and brown people. It's all the people from the South. They're the most impacted, the highest number of cases, all the things outside of New York. We need to get money in our people's hands. And so I just went into like that mode of immediately like, okay, who can I talk to? Who can I get on a phone call with? How can we get this money? How can we raise this money? We were scraping money from our general operating budget, like every dime that we could find. We were just trying to scrape it to get a fund started. Went to our board and said, please let us pull some money out of our cash reserves. We got to be able to get money in folks' hands, and then use that as the leverage point to try to, go after the foundations and get them to, get on board with getting money and getting money quickly. And so a couple of things happened then, which was interesting to me. And I know we're on self-care, but I use this as an example for how you can lose sight of it. So as I'm running around doing this and raising money and all the things and, and going to meetings and everything, I get into a staff meeting. And in the staff meeting, we, go around and we all share how we're doing, what's going on in the world. And I'm sitting in the staff meeting, I'm listening to my staff. So one of the things that Roots prides itself on is hiring. We have like 5 full-time staff folks who work full-time for us, but then we also like to hire people part-time so they can still practice their artistry, right? We don't feel people should have to give up their artistry to be able to work in the field, but we also recognize that that requires flexibility. And so what became readily apparent in this meeting to me was like, oh my gosh, all of my staff who are part-time people have lost their artistry income, right? They're able to work part-time because they're generating funds, and they are, most of them are gig workers, or, you know, work is tied to, you know, projects or, you know, performances or whatever. So I had this moment of just complete like breakdown, because I had been so busy focusing on the external part of trying to get money to our members that I wasn't looking in my backyard, and my own staff was hemorrhaging. And I didn't even see it because I was so like overwhelmed with all the things out here that I was trying to do. And I sat in that meeting and it just brought me to my knees, because I'm like, my own staff is hemorrhaging. And I'm so busy with these big picture things that, you know, an ED is supposed to be focused on, that my own. So I immediately, you know, I was like, oh my God, okay, we got to get, so we like upped everybody's hours, and we, you know, gave our staff members solidarity fund grants so that they could take care of themselves and heal themselves. And, you know, but it was that moment of just like, where you can, sometimes you can get so busy worried about the big picture things that you don't even realize. And so in that moment, I also realized like, I need to take a step back, you know, because if I'm not paying attention to my staff, then, and because it's the type of leader I am, then I'm clearly not taking care of myself either, right? If I'm not looking at them, I'm definitely not looking at me. That's always the last place that I would think good leaders look, is at themselves. And so from that moment on, I just made a very clear decision that, you know, not only for the staff, but for myself, like, if you need time, take it. If you are having a moment, take it. Take as many health and wellness days as you need to take to make yourself whole. If you need to step away from this work and go do something, do that. I mean, the challenge of the pandemic is like, it's not like you could just, you know, go out of your house and, you know, go down the street and hang out with a friend and debrief or hop in your car and go to the beach. It was right in the thick of it when nobody was able to leave. But, you know, my practices have always and have gotten stronger since the pandemic, of daily like meditation, journaling. And because I'm a dancer, you know, I'm a manic about health, exercise, and diet. So, and that's just, you know, and not from an unhealthy place. I'm very body centric, having been a dancer. And so I've always been super careful about what I put into my body. Exercise for me is meditation. It's the place that I can go to, that, you know, whatever is going on inside of my body, that's how I'm able to get it out and work it out and get it out of my body, and get back to a place of stability and calm and peace. And so I just prioritized those things during the pandemic as much as I could, but then also allowed myself grace to know that even doing all those things, what we are going through was like unimaginable. Like, just, you know, some days I would wake up and I would feel like I was in a movie. Like, is this real? Is this happening? Like, I feel like I'm in a movie. This is insane, you know? And then, you know, you add the George Floyd and the uprisings on top of that. And then, so it just was like, is this ever going to end? This is so exhausting. But yeah, for me, it's basic stuff. I know it sounds super cliche, but for me, like, I do not lift my head up off the pillow in the morning until I've spent at least 5 to 10 minutes meditating at a minimum, so that I'm setting my tone for the day. And if I don't do that for some reason, if I oversleep or, you know, something happens that pulls me out of bed early, I can tell the difference. Like, I can feel the difference in how I respond to and react to things if I haven't set that grounding and that tone for myself. So good eating, good mental health practices.
Yeah, and I think you did. Oh, there was so much in there. Oh, because you do forget sometimes. Like you'll be used to, really all of us went into emergency triage mode. That's essentially what we were doing. I mean, everybody, I mean, every organization that I've talked to, has said, we immediately were like, okay, what are we going to do? And trying to figure out what they were going to do. And I've heard more than one person say, for me, I was like, I forgot to breathe. And I'm a singer. And I forgot to breathe, and it really will catch you off guard. And it's the most human thing on the planet to do. So I think it's refreshing to hear somebody in your position to say, I forgot too. I'm human too. I forgot. I might be a leader, but I forgot too, because this is an unusual situation.
Yeah.
You've never gone, anybody on this call been on in a pandemic before? Because I have not.
Not I.
Not even close. So I really appreciate you saying that, Michelle, because I think it's vitally important that we keep hearing people reiterate that this is new. It's okay not to know what is coming next, live day to day, that sort of thing. So thank you so much for being candid about that and being open and transparent about that, because a lot of people, I feel like they have to put up this front of perfectionism, and I am not about that, especially not at a time like this. That's
not serving anybody. That's not like, I was on this great prep call the other day with a whole bunch of other EDs and CEOs of arts organizations talking about, what are we doing to prepare for the election, right? Like, what are you doing for your staff? What practice? And it actually ended up being published in a blog post by Fractured Atlas. And it was such a great call to be on, because we all kind of shared what we're doing to get prepared, for what's going to happen, and good, bad, or ugly, whatever the situation is,
something.
Well, it's going to be something. And to be completely 100% honest, for our folks down here in the South, all scenarios are bad. There is no scenario of how the election ends up that's good for our people. So we're just how do we mitigate? How do we scenario build? How do we do this?
Yeah.
But on that call, after we spent, I think it was a good hour kind of sharing our strategies for what we're doing. And like I said, you can read it on that blog post. But the one question that we all said was so who's having this call for us? Who's on a call right now talking about how do we take care of our EDs and our CEOs who are running our organizations right now during this thing? And then what are we doing for them? I was like, that's a really good question. Who's having this call for us? Because I don't think my board members are, and I don't think your board members are. And that's not to shame board members, but I just don't think oftentimes, especially in process-oriented organizations, board members are thinking about the humanity of their leaders.
And I would even
maybe
say
that way.
Staff as well, because so often, and I see it so often, there is this unfair, but human in a way I understand, there's this unfair and unrealistic expectation of our leaders, right? It's like, well, you don't want to get paid that much, find something to do. It's like, I get that. But at the same time, as we are centering people, as we are centering human beings, as we are centering grace, and what it means to extend from one to another, I need you to kind of place yourself in that situation in both ends. And then it's necessary for everybody to be cared for. It's necessary for everyone to have that grace, to have that support, regardless of where we are in our careers or within the structure, within the organization. So I appreciate you bringing that to light, because it is necessary for us to make sure, staff as well, that we're taking care of our leaders, and then as leaders that we're taking care of our people. So it's just this beautiful combination of you speaking about taking care of your staff, and then taking care of yourself, and then making sure those who are on the same level as you are also taking care of themselves, and then being taken care of for. So
yeah, that's huge right now. And I think, that's the kind of stuff that's going to get us through right now. It's actually seeing each other. For who we are. Please try to see each other. Right. No matter what happens, we need to see each other. So what keeps you motivated?
The work. The work, I always say, I'm like, I wake up every day. I'm so blessed to do this work. I'm so grateful every day that I get to wake up and spend my days doing this. It's hard and it's messy and it's challenging and things drive me crazy about the field. But at the end of the day, like, I'm so grateful for the job that I have. And I know, like, unequivocally that the world that I want to see will not be in my lifetime. I know this. I know that the work I'm doing and the seeds I'm planting and everything I'm doing right now will not be actualized before my time is done in this world. So I do it for my daughter. I do it for my grandbabies, hopefully one day, who, that the world that they live in will be a better world than the one that I was in, or the one that my mother, grew up in as a single Latina woman, single mother. So I do it for my future generations, and knowing that I probably will never see the world I dream of, but it doesn't stop me from wanting to do it every day, wake up and do it every day.
That's again, I can't, because I think sometimes that me factor is a huge thing in our society where, and I'm not talking about self-care. Self-care is much needed. But I think people go, well, if I'm not going to benefit for it, what's the point? There's almost a selfishness. And I think what is important in this kind of work, and Quo talks about it all the time, is that you might not see it. You might not see it come to fruition.
Yeah. Yeah.
But the thing is that I have nephews, she has godsons, like we want the people coming behind us to have something that we didn't have, and to me, that's noble. So it's very noble to hear you say that. And it's realistic to hear you say that. So yeah, my cup runneth over. That's excellent.
And then if we look hard enough, if we look close enough, we see those inklings, right? We see evidence of it taking place. That's what continues to drive. We see it happening. We see what it can be. We see how it feels. Maybe not all the time, maybe not in every situation, but there is enough. If we look closely, there's enough for us to be like, yeah, that's what I'm working for right there. This is what I'm working, this feeling right here, this is what I'm working for. And so I think it's beautiful to continue to allow that, and the fact that we want those to follow, to have greater experiences in that, just as those who came before us wanted this for us, right?
Exactly.
And then how that works going forward. So absolutely.
So I keep thinking about this because, again, in 2017, we are like, this is sort of coming to fruition, even with us three being together here, because really a seed was planted back then, and now here we all are. And so that's a testament that you will see things progress along the way too. Even though you might not see it all, you'll see some of it. And I'm living proof. Quo is living proof. So I have to give kudos to you for that as well, because you really did kick it off. You really did. Like, it really did sort of set a tone, and get the people that were in that room that day throughout the conference. We kept running into people that were in that session, and we would stop and have like 30-minute talks. And it was 10:30, 11 o'clock at night, and we're standing outside of the conference hotel talking more about things. I had that happen on more than one occasion. So it was absolutely incredible. So I have one more question, and then, we can get into final thoughts and such. But what kind of advice do you have for others, particularly people that are leading, right now, but folks that aspire to be leaders?
That's a great question. I have all the thoughts. I have all the thoughts. I actually, I make a personal practice of mentoring young women of color. It's like one of my life's passions and goal. I think I'm mentoring 5 young women right now, which I absolutely don't have time to do, but if a young woman of color comes to me and says, I'm looking for a mentor, I won't say no. Because I think it's that important. I think preparing the next generation and filling that pipeline is part of the solution, right? And so for me, I'm like, how can I not invest in these young folks, because they are going to take us, forward, and I want them to be prepared, and want them to be able to come at that with the knowledge that maybe I didn't have when I was that age, or when I was in their position. So I think the advice that I have is, ask for help, find a mentor. I have had so many amazing mentors over the year that I have to give credit to for being able to inform who I became, you know, and mentors don't always take the form that you think they do. And people will mentor who you think wouldn't have time, right? I am sure people, the young women who I'm mentoring didn't think I would have time to do it, but they were brave enough to ask. And I was like, yeah, of course, absolutely. So ask for help and find somebody that, you know, can be your sounding board, whether that's a mentor or a colleague or somebody that you respect in the field. That sisterhood, that partnership is real and it's needed. And I have, you know, I am a mentee and have mentors still to this day because I think it's that important. So I would say, you know, find your people and lean in hard, because they will get you through, especially those really, really hard, crunchy times, right? And then the other thing that I would just say is be your authentic self. And if that means stepping on people's toes, if that means you getting into trouble, good trouble, to quote our hero, good trouble. Yes. If that means, you know, taking a risk and you know, knowing that, okay, this is going to start some stuff, but it needs to be said, like, be true to yourself, speak your truth. I wish I would have learned that lesson in my early years. It wasn't until my 40s that I really, really learned that how important that element is in leading, and in changing things, and in being the catalyst, you know, right, for the change. Like, if you don't speak your truth and you hold back and you fall into the politically correct, ooh, I better not say that right now, or I better be careful, or I don't want to be seen as the angry Black woman, or, you know, all that bullshit stereotype, oops, sorry, that goes down. Like, don't buy into any of that. Be who you are, speak your truth, say what needs to be said, and don't apologize. Yeah. Like, just do you and show up in the space and be your authentic self. And you know what? It's going to work out. It's going to work out.
Absolutely.
Yeah, that's 100. Any final thoughts from the room? Because I'm good.
No, just
well,
I could do this all day with you too. Like, now I want to go the other way. Now I want to be the one to ask the questions of you two, because I want to hear what you all have to say. You need to do, let me come back and be a facilitator and ask you two questions. I want to know this. I want to do this in reverse.
That would be awesome. Actually, we'll take some heat off of us. Maybe put some on. I don't know. So, you know, this is the time that we go for positive notes. We heard some fantastic things today, things that if you're not putting into practice, put them into practice. You know, listen to this woman. Okay. This is gold. And with that, I'm turning it over to Quo for positive notes.
Positive notes. Listen to Michelle. Yes. As Kristian just said. And as we as arts organizations, as we as human beings, also as we as human beings continue to live our lives, there are things that start to define who we are. There are moments that start to define what matters to us. And what matters to us always comes in the form of connecting to others and what that means. It is important that as we value our identities and who we are and the stories that we create, that we bring that into the work that we do as well. Especially in arts organizations, it is important that we honor those stories. It is important that we know the power of being who we are in the space, in all spaces, so that as we move forward to connect with each other with real, authentic stories, we also move forward to dismantle this system that tells us that we're not about it, or that tells us that we don't need to be a part of it, because we do. We already are. So my positive notes: move forward. Be bold, of course, but then always know that you do not have to do it alone. Lean into the fact that art is so powerful. Lean into the fact that we need each other in this work. Lean into the fact that change comes when we are willing, when we're able, when we're bold enough to do something about it. and then have the humility to continue the conversations, have the commitment to continue the conversations, and then to do the work. And then know that you don't have to do it alone. So those are my positive notes from this wonderful, amazing conversation.
Yes, and we definitely could go on because I have so many more things that I want to ask. But we'll just have to have you back. That's
I
what we're
would be
gonna have to do.
honored. No, this was enjoyable. This was an amazing, amazing time together. I'm very appreciative of both of you for doing this work, for lifting up folks' voices, and being the change,
Well, thank you
especially
so
in the
much.
world of opera.
So yeah, well, and you would know because you've experienced some of it with us and gotten us together
Yes.
on more than one occasion. So very much appreciate it. So yeah, that's our show for today, folks. Michelle, thank you so much for being here today, for taking the time. And we thank you all for tuning in. As per usual, we could not do this without you. Your support is always fantastic. Please, by all means, check out Alternate Roots. Okay,
Yes.
they're doing the work.
Yes.
And we will be sure to put information in the caption for this episode and all that jazz, so you will know where to look for them. And then also, please, by all means, tune in next week, and we will see you then.
All right. Have a good one.